So we have collected the questions from the audience, and here's a question about trust that is easily lost, and building it is usually based on personal perceptions and knowledge. So how do you best enhance trust in digital environment? And I think this applies both to the data and both to the resource communities. So if I would like to hear both of your opinion. Dave, please go first.
Yes, it's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. Trust is very much based upon a perception, and this is where literacy is going to be key, so that people can have a better informed perception through their own knowledge. Absolutely, I can't say that building a new system is going to increase trust just in that system. There's a key role that transparency, openness, and literacy are going to play in helping people to establish their own view on trust. As I say, it's that information translation into knowledge that's really key, that contextualization. And so, from my point of view, literacy plays such a key role in that, and giving people opportunities to learn and be more mentally confident around data.
And how about you, Martijn? How does it link to the resource community?
I fully agree with that. And of course, I think what we do, we build digital tools for those communities, but for us, it's very important actually to organize all those more physical interactions as well, right? So the games that we design for those communities are often offline games. So in order to establish those relations. And of course, in digital environment, a lot is expected from reputation systems or from the trustless trust in blockchain systems, etc. However, I'm not really sure if those really contribute to civic relations, right? They could be very helpful in a economic transaction, but I think civic relations are still really about non-quantified forms of exchange and interaction. So that's why for us that's so important and central to a lot of the things that we're doing.
Okay. Thank you. So there's another question about the lack of basic digital skills and the children not having any idea. I don't know, it's only children. I think many of us maybe have no idea how to keep their data in order. So how do we help ourselves to coordinate? The data literacy is one approach, but what other means do we have to tackle this challenge?
It's such an interesting question, and I like your point, Hanna, there around it's not just children. Like, what we also have to remember is that obviously children are growing up in a digital world more than, I mean, I'm showing my age now, right? Even more than we did, and I see this actually as a, perhaps even a bigger problem for people whose world has changed so much around them compared to the people whose world is like this by default. And that's a really interesting thing when it comes to ethics, because are we going to see greater acceptance from the younger generation over the digital technology than the older generation? And I think that's an interesting thing, that almost the older generation in some cases might be also applying our own fears onto the young, whereas the young are much more used to living in a TikTok, in an Instagram, in a social network world, right? As the social network world for the older generation has come along, and we're having to deal with this whole, who are we in real life and who are we online? And I think that's really interesting in terms of, I studied a little bit of web science while I was at Southampton. Actually, we started it as a discipline there. And what was really interesting about that is thinking about the web as an evolution of the human social machine, essentially. And you see people adopt different personalities online. Who are people in this virtual space? And actually talking to the young, it's really worth talking to the younger generation about that, to see, how do they work within a social network? And I often find I'm talking to them and they go, I don't really care as much. It's like, I am who I am. And they seem to be much happier with that. And so I think it's going to be worth listening to those generations, not just apply our own fears on them, but also listen to how they are kind of interacting with the world where they're born and interacting with social on a day-to-day basis, and often could teach us adults, admittedly, a lot about how to do some of this stuff because of the fact that they're growing up with it.
And how do you see, Martijn, in the civic interaction in design, how do we tackle all these different age groups and get them involved?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I mean, one of the things, not so much has to do with age groups, but some of the things that the question is about, and that Dave was saying, is we also like to do data physicalization. So bringing some of those data back in public space, like we did with the fountain was more a bit of in a provocative, playful way. But then the data really becomes a shared point of reference. It becomes the starting point of a conversation. And I think in general, I think that's how we see data, not as a reflection of the world that's there as pure facts, but also as the beginning point of a conversation. So I think it's really about, and I think, Dave, that's also a lot what your work is about, right? Is about starting those conversations. What do those data means, and finding the tools for that, rather than making maybe the data more precise, whatever that could be.
Absolutely, there's no such thing as a perfect world, no such thing as a perfect data either.
So then this is maybe more to Martijn about these digital resource community platforms that are tailored and maybe kind of challenging a bit the market offering. So how do we get this adaptation to these new platforms? Is there a challenge there?
Yeah, I absolutely, and I think that has to do. I think I partly recognize what this person has written here. Although, of course, the communities that we work with are by definition interested in figuring it out themselves, but they're probably more of a bit of an avant-garde, early adopter kind of communities rather than sort of the mainstream. But I think part of that has to do with what we call this imagining, right? Sort of. Really bringing out the conversation about what alternatives could be there, and also what are sort of the negative consequences of the platforms that are there. Because people choose them because they are, and sometimes they work well. I mean, maybe you don't need always to go sort of out of your way to design something really, really complex. But indeed, I think if we look at current discussions in society around big platforms like Facebook or the metaverse like we had, we see that more and more people are becoming critical. And I think that's also part of what we aim to do. Speculate, bring out alternative futures, tell those stories. So almost more, not just invite the thing, but also invent the thing, but also invest in the story building around it.
I mean, from our point of view as well, sorry to Hanna on that one, it's just really interesting. At the ODI, we've also done things around the open banking standard, which people may have come across before. And there's a role in here for governments to play in terms of, policy making and information that comes out of governments. I mean, we're living in a world now where we're transitioning over to electric cars. There's lots of policies around that. And often the government plays a key role in setting in place, kind of mandates that help with the competitions and markets, and making it easy for people to go between mobile networks, making it easier for people to change their banking provider. I don't know how many people on here have ever changed who they bank with for their current account. It's may never have happened, but breaking down those barriers for people to be able to go from one energy supplier to another, literally decide. We've seen academic research in this area around literally doing it hour by hour, which is really interesting. Who's got the cheapest energy right now? If I need, if I'm plugged into the grid and I'm actually contributing energy, who's going to pay me the most, right? We're going to move into a prosumer market, and I think there's going to be a lot here that's going to enable people to. We're not going to have one market dominant, the proprietary provider anymore. There might be a lot more dynamicism in digital services, but also the physical as well.
Okay, I think we have still one more last question. So what about the motivation? I think it links both to this design processes and becoming an interactive citizen towards your government or your community, but then also about the data skills. So how do you build this motivation? What are your methods of motivating people to developing their skills or taking part in the design process?
Well, I think for me, often the motivation is for me, often the motivation exists around the problem you're trying to solve. So, in terms of the digital skills, you might actually need those people's input who don't have it because they've got a motivation in solving the problem. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that for us, participatory design or civic interaction design doesn't mean that everybody is a designer, but it means that people should have a voice in the design process, right? And that's also what I meant with, for instance, coalitioning. It's the role of the designer to bring those people together and have them engage in discussions, for instance, around a tool like the fountain. But then it's the designer, I think, who often has the sort of the skills in aesthetics, in technical systems, in ethics, etc., who can sort of integrate that, what comes out of all of discussions, into a product, a service, an ecosystem.
I just realized also that I misread the question, but unfortunately we run out of time now. I would really much like to thank you for sharing your work and the experiences, and also even some concrete tools that anyone that are out there for grabs for anybody to start using with, and hope that people will follow your work also in the future. So many thanks for the presentations.